We've been studying Psalms of Ascent. We've been on a pilgrimage, Psalm 120 to Psalm 134. We've covered the Psalms, and today I simply want to put a bow on it and take communion and prepare our hearts for Holy Week. So today is just a time of reflection. We're going to cover a couple of thoughts and words. So one is remembrance. Everybody say remembrance. So as you're listening today, you'll just think, okay, this is a time of remembering. A contrast. Everyone say contrast. Yeah, so you'll see some contrasts come up and down. It's not going to be a long message, just a short one. That's what he says. And then leaven. Everybody say leaven, as in unleavened bread. Leaven, yeah. We'll talk about those, and we'll just come at them for a little bit. So communion, we're going to take communion. Now listen, I love communion. And it's more than just getting a little snack. Oh, good, I'm hungry, this will be good. It's not that. There's a very real presence of God's ministering spirit. It's inside of you and together. It's a time of remembrance, past, present, future. That Greek word has a time continuum. You're going back to the foot of the cross to remind yourself he died for you. His grace is present for you even in the now, the muck and mire you're in, and the hope of the resurrection in the future. We do this in remembrance of me. And we do it once a month. Sometimes John Wesley says you should do it every day, and sometimes we have folks that are Roman Catholic and we have folks that come from a Lutheran background. They say, why don't we do it more often? It's just difficult logistically here to do that. In my new $10 to $12 million sanctuary, we will have all the things we need, but until then, we enjoy the beauty that we have here, and we enjoy our time together here. So 3 times a year, the Jewish people, whether they lived in Jerusalem, whether they lived outside of Jerusalem, whether they lived in a whole different country, they were asked, required, but they didn't do it every year because everybody just can't leave all the cattle and all the sheep. The bandits would come in, so they'd take turns, and they would do this pilgrimage. They would walk up, clear their mind, get their mind focused on going to the temple and God's presence in their life. Just kind of crowd out the noise and just listen. And they'd go up there in the spring for Passover. And then they would go back in the summer for Pentecost. And then they would go back Sukkot or Tabernacle to remind them of wandering in the wilderness. And God took care of them even when they had to put a tabernacle. They all have symbolic meaning, outward signs for inward grace. And when they would go there, they would remember. Now, how many of you are like me? Do you have a snapshot of time, a time of remembrance, that you can remember something that intellectually it doesn't seem like you should be able to remember? So, both my parents are passed away, but I was one time describing them a memory I had, and they looked at each other, and they said, "You were only 2 when that happened." I don't remember my 2s. I remember that snapshot in time. Does anybody else have a memory they can go back and say, I remember, what were we doing? How could you remember that? And so there's this moment. And so I was reflecting on memories this past week. My oldest boy, Pearson, when he was 3 years of age, he would get croup, or we'd call it the wheezies. Anybody ever deal with croup with their kids? Yeah. And so you would have this contrast. You were supposed to take him into a steaming shower, and then you sat there like a sauna for a little bit, and then you'd run them outside into the cold air, and they're supposed to open up their airways and so forth. But when he was 3, Maddie was just a baby, and he was really, really struggling. And I remember looking at my wife, Karen, and saying, he's struggling, the little guy, I got to get him somewhere. And she goes, agreed, go. So just a couple miles down the road was this little outpost. I don't know if it was an after hours or an ER or what they called it back then, but there's just a little clinic that was open 24 hours a day. And I remember taking him and going there. And have you ever walked into a space, a room, a place, and you could just feel the emotions that were in there? So sometimes, for example, maybe you go into a house where there's lots of love and laughter, and when you walk in, you can just feel the lightness, the joy there. Or maybe you go somewhere where there's sadness and heaviness and it feels dark. That's how this place felt when I took Pearson inside of it. I don't know what happened before us, but there was a heaviness. So the nurse took us back, and they took us back to this room, and they gave him this little nebulizer trying to help out. And then they brought in prednisone. I don't know how many of you have ever had prednisone, but they put the prednisone in, and it went down, and then the prednisone decided to come right back up. Now, I don't know if you're like me or not, but if you're like me and somebody is ill or vomits, I think it's an invitation to join the party, right? It's like community. Once somebody throws up in front of me, I'm right there with them. But not this time. Because parents, when you're with your kids, it's different, isn't it? I mean, you wipe their nose with your hands sometime when they're little and then like, oh, right? I mean, your kids are just different. And I remember when he threw up, rather than going, ooh, where's your mother? I pulled him closer and tighter. And I remember catching it, moving over to the sink, and just sitting there and getting water on and grabbing a paper towel and wiping him. But I remember the whole time talking to him and holding him and just telling him, it's all right, buddy. Daddy's here. Daddy loves you. It's okay. Breathe with me. Breathe. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. It's okay. Daddy's here. Daddy loves you. And I remember this little snapshot in time when I looked over to the door and there were two nurses standing in the door, one with tears streaming down her face, the other one mumbled. And I remember what she said. She said, it's so nice to see a parent who actually loves their child. I don't know what happened before we got there, but whatever happened made an indelible memory in their soul. There was a contrast of a loving parent versus whatever they experienced. And in the Psalms of Ascent, the whole time we're going on this pilgrimage, we're going on a journey, God has been whispering and shouting to us, I'm your parent, I love you, I'm present, I want to be involved in your life. So last week I had someone come up and say, Pastor Creighton, I'm enjoying the church, and I said, good. And they said, but I got to tell you, I don't know if I've ever heard so much preaching out of the Old Testament in a long time. And I said, well, it is part of the Bible. And Jesus and the disciples, when you talk in the New Testament about reading the Scriptures, they're reading the Old Testament. And the New Testament is built upon the Old Testament. So if you really want to understand the words of Jesus, you've got to go back and understand the words of the Old Testament, and it builds. And so we have this understanding and thinking that God's law is harsh, and it's just this very strict thing. It's legalistic, and then Jesus in the New Testament is full of grace. But that's not how the Hebrew people saw it. The Hebrew people understood the law as grace. God loves us so much that he gives us boundaries. It's a contrast between love and ambivalence. How many of you did not understand at the time when your parents gave you a curfew, or when there were certain movies they didn't want you to see, or certain friends they were a little hesitant to have you hang out with, and you realize they did it not because they were trying to be jerks, but because they loved you? And how many of you can look back at time and see friends in high school whose parents were ambivalent and didn't care what they did? And in retrospect, you can remember and you can think back to their lives and you can think, oh my gosh, how many times were they acting out just trying to get attention, just trying to be loved? And I got that, and I almost took that for granted. Your children don't need a lot of friends at this stage. They need parents, by the way. They need friends. They just don't need you to be that person. All right, it's a different sermon. I'll stop. So in early spring, they would go to Passover. So we say they went 3 times. But in reality, when you went to Passover, you were really going to 3, if not 4 different feasts. It was all within a 7 to 8 day time frame, depending on how you interpret the scriptures. And today, the Hebrews will even have a little debates whether it was 8 days or 7 days. We're not going to get in that debate. But the very first day was the beginning of the religious year. How many days do we have? 365 in a year, is that right? Thereabouts. I think they are around 350, 354, so their time changes a little different than ours. So the first day was Passover. The second day was unleavened bread. The third day was the first fruits. Now, we're going to unpack this, but can I just give you a sneak peek? Just to kind of grasp a little bit. If we were to talk to the early church, they would say, Jesus dying on the cross, his body did not decay, and he was the first to rise out of all people, and he was the first fruit. So, in Deuteronomy chapter 16, 1 through 4, observe the month of Aviv. It's B's, but they pronounce them with V's. So observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover, that one day of the Lord your God, because the month of Aviv, he brought you out of Egypt by night. He sacrifices the Passover to the Lord God Almighty Yahweh, an animal from your flock or herd, to the place the Lord will place as a dwelling for his name. Do not eat it with bread made with yeast or leaven. So this is from Israel. I ordered this. This is from Israel. This is unleavened bread. Looks like a cracker. So when you take communion and you get a cracker and you're thinking, why don't we have Hawaiian bread? It was not meant to be tasty treat. It's just a cracker. It's unleavened. It didn't get a chance to rise. And we'll talk about that in a second. So for 7 days, eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. In other words, this is a reminder. It's an outward sign, a lot of symbolism of an inward grace. Back when you were forced slavery, you were in poverty, you had no rights, you were nothing. Back when you were nothing, you weren't even viewed as a human being. We could rape you, we could pillage you, we could do whatever we want because you have no rights. I took you when you were nothing, and I made you something. You were created to be something, but humanity in its sinfulness made you into nothing. And I'm reminding you, you're more than nothing. You are a child of the King. You are a child of God. And you left in a haste because I told you to. So you didn't have time to let it rise. That's why it's unleavened. So remember this. In the days of your life, you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt. Let no yeast be found in your possession in all of your land for 7 days. So there's 3 movements that are happening in this. The first one is Passover, which, by the way, was a foreshadowing of Jesus. Put blood, because what it says in the Hebrew, they thought that Pharaoh, the Egyptians thought that Pharaoh was a god. So the son, the firstborn of God, must die. And so there's these forecasts that the Hebrew people were hearing and being prophesied and trying to understand. But anything outside of the door, that's chaos. There's order inside of the door. And if you want to have fun, grab your concordance and grab a big concordance and open it up and start to look at the word door in the New Testament. And it's Jesus and redemption. In Revelation, I stand at the door and I knock. There's redemption. I'm buying you back. I'm taking you from affliction and I'm making you something. In John, he's the door, the gatekeeper from the sheep and those outside. And if you want to get to him, you've got to go through him and you've got to go through redemption. You've got to be bought back. And then, so that's the first day. The second day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, it lasts for 7 days, so they don't know it's the Passover part of the 7 or is it 7 extra days? It doesn't matter. The third day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, So it's the second day of that feast. You have the Feast of First Fruits, which were usually barley. And it's a thank you offering. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, we're told that Jesus was the first fruit. Now, don't let the size scare you. It's 700 pages. Just skip the first chapter. It's the one that gets the most convoluted. Very easy to read. The Resurrection of the Son of God by N.T. Wright. This pretty much is the go-to book for most scholars on how the Hebrews understood resurrection and how the early church did and how we are where we are today. Wonderful book. All right. The word leaven is that second day. So the first day, Passover. Third day, the first fruits, Jesus resurrected. But now we're in this middle, this beginning of unleavened bread. And it means it's sour, it's bitter, it's yeast or baking powder used to produce fermentation. It's taking something small that can become something big. So stay with me, because this is the part I want us to focus in. Don't lose this amongst the trees. This is what we're talking about. Something small in your life that can become something big. It's usually negative, but sometimes it's positive. So in Matthew 13, Jesus told them yet another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked through the dough. So here's the thing. Scholars say that you're going to influence about 50 people a day. I didn't talk to 50 people in one day. Doesn't matter. You could talk to 3 people, 5 people, and then they turn and talk to somebody. If you're in a grumpy mood, your grumpy mood can make these people around you grumpy. They can turn and make somebody grumpy, and pretty soon you spread grumpiness. Good job. Or you can be in a positive mood, and you can help turn somebody around. And they turn around and are in a positive mood. But you can influence people. So when you sit there and think, I don't know if Jesus is doing much, what good can I do? You let Jesus transform your life, it's going to affect positively or negatively your family. And that's going to also affect your school, your friend group, the place you work. Just by following Jesus, you begin to ooze Jesus. If you choose not to, the yeast can become negative and you can ooze something else. Usually there's a prescription for it, but I don't know. I don't even know what that means. I have no idea. Chapel, I'm sorry I even said that. So it says fermentation. Fermentation, that's a big word, so I had to look it up. A chemical decomposition of an organic substance by enzymatic action in the absence of oxygen, often with the formation of gas. I have no idea. So I had to look it up again. It's decaying. Something's dying. This is interesting. And don't take this and get weird with it, but this was just kind of interesting. The Hebrew people oftentimes thought that when you died, your soul, your spirit, would hover for about 3 days. After the third day, it would go away because by then your body would start to decay. So if you think back when Jesus called forth Lazarus, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been dead for 4 days. Yep, and that's why I lingered. I wanted you to see the power of God and not just think, oops, the doctors made a mistake. So for the Hebrew people, they saw this Day of Atonement. They saw unleavened bread. And they also saw the first fruits. All of this was to remember. But for the early church, the Day of Atonement was Jesus dying on the cross. The Day of Unleavened Bread was that his body did not decay. He was different. He defeated the decay. He defeated the death. And henceforth, he's the first fruit of all that will be resurrected. And this is how the early church understood this. Now, if we were to look into 1 Corinthians chapter 5, your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little yeast works through the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old yeast that you may have a new batch without yeast. Get rid of the old bad thoughts you had and bring in God's thoughts. For Christ is our Passover lamb and has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival, but not with the old yeast, the yeast of malice and wickedness, but with the bread without yeast, the bread of sincerity and truth. Or as Jesus says, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And then they understood that he wasn't talking about bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and Sadducees, against the hypocrisy of those who followed Jesus on Sunday, but the rest of the week you don't see any kind of difference in them. So the first day, the Hebrew people would have atonement, Passover. The second day of Passover would start the unleavened bread. They would then symbolically remind themselves not to have any sin in their life that would grow within. In fact, what they would do is they would take a broom and sweep every nook and cranny. The grandmas would actually walk around the night before and sprinkle stuff in the nooks and crannies to see if they were really going to do it. And they would go and they would get all of the stuff out of the nooks and crannies to symbolize outwardly what was going on in their own heart. And then they'd put it in a pan and they'd go out and they'd burn it because they wanted to get that away from them because it represented the sinfulness in their heart. And what it was saying is this: it may just be a white lie, it may just be a simple habit, it may be something that doesn't seem that bad, but if you don't take care of it and bring it to Jesus, guess what? It's going to get worse and worse and worse, and it's going to grow. And so this is what begins to happen. For some reason, you get upset with old Creighton. I don't know why. I think I'm a nice enough guy, but you just don't like old Creighton for some reason. Maybe I said something that offended you. Maybe you thought I should have done something to help you and I wasn't aware of it. Maybe you're just mad at someone else, but you don't want to bring strife into the family, so let's just pick on Creighton. Yeah, let's pick on Creighton. And so you go out to have lunch and you decide to have roast pastor. Let's just tear old Creighton apart. Let's tear the whole church apart because I didn't like this. Well, now that you're mentioning it, the coffee was a little cold and this and this. And then you go off on it. And it seems harmless enough, but it starts to get into your conversation. And the next day you're with some friends from the church, and so you just bring it back up. I mean, you want to pray for Creighton, really, is what you're trying to say. But then it gets into your knitting group at church or your small group, and pretty soon it gets into the church, and then unity is lost. So this morning we're going to take communion. And as we take communion, you're really going to come to a fork in the road. It's a weird saying. It's usually a Y in the road. But you're going to come there and you're going to say to yourself, self, am I going to become a person who allows the yeast of the Holy Spirit to go through and start to change my habits and my thoughts for good so that I could be a positive representative of Jesus? Or am I going to just quite frankly own the fact that I'm going to do it my way? And sometimes I get angry, and that's all right. If I'm angry because it's all about me. And I'm not going to stop doing some of those habits and things that can bring disunity. At least you're honest, because God knows what you're thinking anyway. Now, if you say that and then say, I'm naming them, but I need to let them go, Jesus is that parent that comes up and puts his arm around you and says, we all knew it was there. We're just waiting to be invited to help you work on it. And we'll start today, and it may take a while, but we'll work on it together. One last thought, because this series has been called Pilgrimage, and we're on a pilgrimage, and just because we're done with this series doesn't mean it stops now, right? So my son Pearson, during COVID in 2020, began to feel weird. He would go play baseball, and he would go back for softball, and things got dizzy, and his his life just got weird. So he finally went to a doctor and he said, well, you have POTS. It's a disease that's come on to young men got worse since COVID. Some football players, if you remember 2020 and 2021, were having heart issues. They had to stop in college football. That's a part of the POTS. So the doctor said, Pearson, when you're watching TV, your heart and your body is functioning like you're mountain climbing. You don't ever relax. Your eyes, if you looked at his eyes, they're in fight and flight mode. So he would have a heartbeat around 80 resting. But the moment he stood up, it would shoot to 120, 125, and you could just faint. So he hasn't sung. Some of you remember, he used to sing in the praise team. He hasn't sung for over 3 years. And so I said, buddy, we're wrapping up. And there's a song that you sing sometimes, and Donnie sings it, and the praise team sings it, but it's come out of sadness from wherever you've been. Come brokenhearted, let rescue begin. Come find your mercy, O sinner, kneel. Earth has no sorrow that heaven can't heal. So lay down your burdens and lay down your shame. All who are broken, lift up your face. O wanderer, come home. You're not too far. So lay down your heart, and come as you are. I said, that's what we're talking about today. Do you think you could sing it? And he said, well, I'd have to sit in a chair, so if I passed out, it wouldn't be that far of a fall. And I haven't sung for 3 years. And I said, I'm going to take that as a yes. Thank you. So this morning, as we remind ourselves from a couple weeks ago, we're all part of the fellowship of withered hands. We're all on this pilgrimage. We're all growing together, and we all have issues that we're dealing with, but we're aware that God loves us and cares for us and is doing it with us. And so on the night that he was betrayed, he took the bread and he broke it, and he said, take and eat. Do this how? In remembrance of me. Remember I went to the cross. Remember I'm walking with you now, even as you're trying to clean yourself up. Remember. And then he took the wine, and he said, take and drink. Do this in remembrance of me. There's nothing you've said, there's nothing you've done that's so strong and powerful, my blood can't wash it and cleanse you. Take, drink, do this in remembrance of me.